Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Room of Requirement. This is the third video on a 10-part series that I am doing covering Hermeticism. So this one is the Hermetic Path Explained, Gnosis, Rebirth, and the Ascent of the Soul. Let's dive in. A person can spend an entire lifetime improving the identity that keeps them imprisoned. They can become more disciplined, more informed, more successful, and even more spiritual, while the same fears, appetites, resentment, and unconscious patterns continue to govern them from beneath the surface. Hermeticism presents a far more radical possibility. It suggests that personality we normally call the self is not the deepest self at all. It is a temporary structure assembled through nature, experience, desire, memory, and fate. Spiritual awakening does not occur when the personality collects more knowledge. It occurs when the center of consciousness shifts and an entirely different order begins to govern the human being. The Hermetic texts call this rebirth. It is not the adoption of a new belief, nor is it simply beginning a better version of the old personality. It is the awakening of the mind that recognizes its divine origin and is no longer unconsciously ruled by the forces that shape its former identity. In the 13th treatise of the Corpus Hermeticum, Tat asks Hermes to reveal the teaching of rebirth. Hermes had previously withheld it, telling Tat that he would receive the teaching only when he was prepared to become a stranger to the cosmos. This phrase is easy to misunderstand. It does not necessarily mean abandoning the world, despising nature, or withdrawing from human life. It means becoming inwardly unfamiliar with the system that has governed one's identity. The ordinary person is at home within the values of the world. They know how to pursue status, defend pride, satisfy appetite, compare themselves with others, and protect the image they have built. To become a stranger to the cosmos is to stop treating that conditioned identity as the final authority. Tat has reached the point where information is no longer enough. He does not merely want another explanation of God. He wants to know how a human being is transformed. The word gnosis means knowledge, but Hermetic gnosis is not the accumulation of facts. A person may memorize every planetary correspondence, study every Hermetic manuscript, and speak fluently about divine mind while remaining governed by anger, vanity, fear, and desire. Gnosis is knowledge that changes the knower. It occurs when a teaching is no longer held outside the self as an idea. The individual recognizes directly that consciousness is not limited to the passing contents of personality. They begin to perceive the difference between awareness itself and the forces moving through awareness. This is why Hermetic knowledge cannot be reduced to doctrine. One may be told that the soul is divine, but that statement remains theoretical until the person experiences a change in identity. The old center must lose its authority. Gnosis is therefore not simply learning something new. It is seeing from somewhere new. When Tat asked from what womb the reborn human emerges, Hermes gives a strange answer. The womb is wisdom, understood in silence, and the seed is the true good, and the birth occurs through the will of God. This language reveals that Hermetic rebirth cannot be manufactured through intellectual force. The student can prepare, purify, listen, and become receptive, but the final transformation is not presented as a mechanical achievement of the ego. Silence is essential because the ordinary personality survives through constant narration. It explains, defends, judges, compares, remembers, anticipates, and reacts. Beneath this continuous activity, the person rarely encounters consciousness without the story attached to it. Hermetic silence is therefore more than the absence of sound. It is a suspension of the identity that is always telling us who we are. Within that silence, another form of understanding becomes possible. Hermes tells Tat that the human being contains a series of tormenting forces. Their names vary slightly across translations, but they include ignorance, grief, intemperance, uncontrolled desire, injustice, greed, error, envy, deceit, anger, rashness, and malice. These are not presented merely as occasional bad behaviors. They are powers that govern perception, and each one creates a particular version of reality. Greed makes the world appear as something to possess. Envy transforms another person's success into a personal wound. Anger narrows consciousness until only injury and retaliation remain. Ignorance prevents the individual from recognizing the source of their suffering. Desire convinces the mind that peace lies in the next object, experience, or victory. The tormentors do not need to possess the person from outside. They operate through identification. Anger rules whenever the individual becomes anger and can no longer observe it. Desire rules whenever the person mistakes wanting for necessity. Fear rules whenever imagined danger becomes the unquestioned reality of the moment. The Hermetic problem is therefore not that human beings experience passions. The problem is that the passions become governors. Hermes does not instruct Tat to destroy the tormentors through violence. Instead, divine powers enter consciousness and the lower forces lose their place. These powers include knowledge of God, joy, self-control, restraint, righteousness, generosity, truth, goodness, life, and light. The wording differs among translators, but the pattern is clear. The lower nature is displaced by the arrival of the higher order. This is one of the most distinctive features of the Hermetic teaching. There are 12 tormentors, but only 10 powers. The transformation is not presented as a simple battle in which one virtue attacks one vice. The higher powers reorganize the entire field of consciousness. When truth becomes present, deception cannot operate in the same way. When generosity takes root, greed loses its foundation. When knowledge of the divine awakens, ignorance is not merely argued against, it is illuminated. The Hermetic path is therefore not endless warfare against the personality. It is the cultivation of the consciousness in which the former rulers can no longer govern. A useful way to understand Hermetic rebirth is as a change of government within the soul. Before rebirth, the personality is governed from below. Decisions arise from fear, appetite, social conditioning, wounded pride, unconscious memory, and the demand for validation. The person may believe that they are freely choosing, yet much of their life is being directed by forces they have never examined. After rebirth, the same human faculties remain, but their order changes. Desire is not erased, it is placed under discernment. Emotion is not destroyed, it is no longer permitted to define reality by itself. The body is not rejected, it becomes an instrument rather than a master. This is why rebirth is more radical than moral improvement. Moral improvement may teach the old personality to behave better. Rebirth changes the authority from which the human being lives. And the question is no longer, how can I make my personality more powerful? It becomes, what is this personality meant to serve? Hermes tells Tat that the one who is reborn is no longer understood merely through the visible body. Tat begins to perceive himself through mind and declares that he is present throughout the elements and the forms of life. This should not be read as ordinary personal grandiosity. Tat is not claiming that his social personality has become the ruler of the universe. The boundaries of that personality have temporarily ceased to define his identity. The reborn consciousness recognizes participation in a life larger than the separate self. It no longer experiences existence solely from the standpoint of me against the world. It perceives the self as belonging to the whole. And this is why genuine mystical experience tends towards humility rather than inflation. The personality has not become infinite. It has discovered that it was never the center. The first treatise of the Corpus Hermeticum describes the soul ascending through 7 cosmic spheres associated with planetary governors. At each level, the soul relinquishes forces connected with embodied existence and fate. This ascent is often treated as an elaborate occult map, but its deeper principle is simple. What was acquired during descent must be surrendered during return. The soul entered embodiment and became clothed in patterns belonging to the cosmic order. During ascent, those patterns are removed. What remains is not the socially constructed identity, the emotional history, or the collection of desires. What remains is the capacity for divine knowledge. The planetary ascent should not be reduced to a modern visualization exercise. Within the ancient text, it expresses liberation from the forces that govern ordinary embodied life. The soul rises because it's no longer held by what formerly defined it. The planetary rulers administer fate, but Hermeticism does not teach that the human being is completely powerless. Its answer to fate is not personal willpower alone. Its answer is the awakened mind. As long as a person is unconscious of the forces operating through them, these forces function as fate. A repeated pattern feels inevitable because the individual cannot see the mechanism producing it. The same desire creates the same choice. The same fear creates the same avoidance. And the same wound recreates the same relationship. Freedom begins with recognition. Once the force is seen, the person is no longer completely identical with it. A space appears between consciousness and reaction. From a Hermetic perspective, this space is spiritually significant. It is where the higher mind can enter the chain of cause and effect. The person may still live within nature, time, and circumstance, but they are no longer entirely governed by them. The ascent beyond fate therefore begins before death. It begins whenever consciousness ceases to obey a lower force simply because that force has appeared. Beyond the 7 planetary spheres lies the Ogdoad, the 8th region. Here, the purified soul joins the powers that praise the divine. The image of praise is important. The culmination of Hermetic ascent is not the personal acquisition of cosmic status. It is the participation in a greater harmony. The separate will no longer stand against the whole. This is why hymns, prayer, and thanksgiving appear so frequently in Hermetic spirituality. Knowledge reaches completion in reverence. The person who truly perceives the order of existence does not merely analyze it, they respond to it. The 8th sphere represents consciousness beyond the ordinary forces of fate, but our later video on the discourse of the 8th and 9th will explore this mystical ascent in greater depth. Hermetic rebirth gives high magic its true purpose. Ritual is not meant merely to provide unusual sensations or increase the magician's sense of importance. Its higher function is to change the order of the inner world. Planetary work, for example, is not only the acquisition of planetary power. It reveals where planetary qualities have become distorted within the practitioner. Martial force may appear as courage or uncontrolled aggression. Solar force may become spiritual illumination or the need to be admired. Mercurial intelligence may serve truth or become sophisticated deception. The magician's task is not to collect these forces as possessions. It is to bring them into lawful relationship under the direction of the awakened consciousness. Without rebirth, magic can strengthen the very personality that requires transformation. Knowledge feeds pride, ritual feeds fascination, and spiritual experience becomes another identity to defend. Hermeticism warns that the old ruler is capable of wearing sacred clothing. The measure of the work is therefore not how powerful the practitioner feels. It is what governs them when they are challenged. Hermetic rebirth is not achieved through one dramatic experience. The texts present a decisive awakening, but the qualities associated with that awakening must become visible in life. Truth must replace self-deception. Self-control must become stronger than compulsion. Generosity must interrupt greed. Knowledge must become responsibility. The spiritual identity must express itself through conduct, or it remains imagination. The Hermetic path therefore requires rigorous self-observation, not self-hatred, but the willingness to see which power is speaking through us at any moment. When anger speaks, can it be observed before it becomes action? When envy appears, can its false interpretation of reality be recognized? When pride seeks spiritual superiority, can the magician return to humility? These moments are not interruptions to the great work. They are where the great work occurs. Hermetic rebirth begins with a disturbing discovery. Much of what we call the self is a collection of forces competing for control. Desire says, I am you. Fear says, I am protecting you. Anger says, I alone can restore your power. Pride says, without me, you will disappear. The Hermetic initiate does not answer these voices by creating another mask. They learn to recognize the awareness in which every voice appears. From that deeper center, the old governors begin to lose their throne. This is the meaning of Ascent. The soul does not rise because it has escaped being human. It rises because it is no longer completely ruled by the forces that once defined its humanity. One layer at a time, the borrowed identity is surrendered until consciousness can stand without the names, wounds, ambitions, and fears it once mistook for itself. The real question of Hermetic rebirth is not whether we believe the soul is divine. It is whether anything divine has begun to govern the way we live. In the next video, we will turn to the Asclepius, where the Hermetic vision expands beyond the transformation of the individual. We will encounter humanity as the mediator between spirit and matter, the cosmos as a living divine being, and the mystery of sacred images and the haunting prophecy concerning the fall of Egypt. The question will no longer be only how the soul ascends, but what responsibility an awakened human being carries within the world. Okay, you guys, that's what I have for you on Gnosis and Ascent of the Soul. The next video will be the Asclepius Explained. Thanks for sticking around. Appreciate you guys, and I will see you next time. Bye.